No wizard. And today we are talking about Hegel once again, going into sections 54 and 55, and just to jump right into it. So the last section talked about. Here's my recap of the last section. I said Hegel continues his tirade against formalism by explaining what you miss when you only depend on reductive essentialist schematicism. By claiming you understand something just because you get the theory or the general shape is like saying you read a book because you read the table of contents. Or even like saying you grasp the entire concept because you read the book but never experienced it in real life. He goes on to show how things have a self-containing depth that others itself, um, that kind of others itself, like an othering, self-othering, but also reintegrates that back into itself as an ongoing process of self-development. Therefore, if you truly want to practice a scientific cognition, you can't depend merely on cold, purely objective theory and call that understanding. You have to get in there fully to explore a thing and to grasp this depth and practice this negativity scheme, I guess you can call it, to see how the components are a part of the whole. Yet also determine they're when you practice negativity, the components are part of a whole, but also determinate components in and of themselves. Yeah. I need to find better descriptions. And Dr. Sadler recapped the last section as the following. He said, in this section, Hegel discusses the perspective embodied by the dialectical approach of scientific cognition and its difference from a schematizing approach oriented by the understanding. A genuinely scientific approach gives itself entirely over to the dynamic life of the object, developing an understanding of its own particular necessities and its self-development through becoming other, and then reappropriating that otherness, allowing the concrete thing to become a moment in the greater whole rather than just a part or element of it. So yeah, I think I sort of, was following along that premise there, hopefully. And sorry for the background noise, but it is what it is. So we're going to jump into the next era. Boom. Just sped up a little bit, so
In general, because, as we put it above, substance is in itself or implicitly subject, all content is its own reflection into itself.
mm,
The substance or substance of anything that exists is its self-identity. For a failure of self-identity would be its dissolution. Self-identity, however, is pure abstraction, but this is thinking. When I say quality, I am saying simple determinateness. It is by quality that one existence is distinguished from another, or is an existence. It is for itself, or it subsists through this simple oneness with itself. But it is thereby essentially a thought. Comprehended in this is the fact that being is thought. And this is the source of that insight which usually eludes the usual superficial talk about the identity of thought and being. Now, since the subsistence of an existent thing is a self-identity or pure abstraction, it is the abstraction of itself from itself, or it is itself its lack of self-identity and its dissolution, its own inwardness and withdrawal into itself, its own becoming.
so I know I'm going a little faster here, so break that down a little bit. What I think he's saying here, I say quality. Saying simple determinateness is by the quality that one exists is distinguished from one another, or is in existence. It is for itself and subsists, but is thereby essentially a thought. Comprehending this thought uses superficial talk about the identity of thought. So basically, how I'm thinking about this. Um, Once again, that otherness, when you practice that negativity, when you think about a concept, right, or experience a concept, that experience, that I guess that's what you call the phenomenology of a thing, you know, it becomes something different by you experiencing because you're comparing it to other things. You're by thinking about it in and of itself requires you to separate yourself from it, right? Which is a pretty significant thing because when you think about it, many other creatures, on this earth, we don't think they separate themselves from, the environment too much. They don't really have a sense of self, and therefore they cannot have a sense of other. So by the very virtue of having a sense of self, we automatically other ourselves and other things. Um, which seems like one of those things that's like simple, but at the same time, it's extremely interesting and like fascinating, where you really delve into that. But now, since the subsistence of an existent thing is a self-identity of pure abstraction, is the abstraction of itself from itself, or it is itself its lack of self-identities and its dissolution, its own awareness, and drawn to itself, its own becoming. So yeah, that othering, right? That abstraction of itself from itself. So once again, like when you other something, when you other yourself or other things, it's like it becomes abstract. Like if I'm talking about this cup, right? On a regular basis, you might not really think about it as a cup, or what it is. But when you say, okay, so what is a cup, right? Then you go into the question of, okay, it's you automatic by just asking what it is, you begin to abstract it by saying, okay, now by saying, oh, what is a cup? Then you have this abstract idea of cup as a category, as a concept, and you're thinking of anything that is separate, anything that holds a beverage, or some other thing. And again, that's a very simple explanation, but I think that goes especially for these conceptual ideas of justice or equality or things like that. Just by thinking about the thing, about that concept, you inherently abstract it. You take it out of itself, and by doing so, you can understand it even more. So it comes full circle. I guess I should put it like that. But yeah, it's all right. This is why I really love this stuff. It seems like almost circular and pedantic in a way, but it's not. Because it's true that when you think about things, just by thinking about them, like, or just by the action of thinking about them, those things become something else. And that idea is it's just so fascinating to me. I don't know if I'm communicating this fascination
Or
enough. I
pure
don't know. That's
abstraction.
that's kind
It
of
is the abstraction of itself from itself, or it is itself its lack of self-identity. Because this is the nature of what is, and insofar as what is has this nature for our knowing, this knowing is not an activity that deals with the content as something alien, is not a reflection into itself away from the content. Science is not that idealism which replaced the dogmatism of assertion with a dogmatism of assurance, or a dogmatism of self-certainty. On the contrary, since our knowing sees the content return into its own inwardness, its activity is totally absorbed in the content. For it is the immanent self of the content, yet it has at the same time returned into itself, for it is pure self-identity and otherness. Thus it is the cunning which, while seeming to abstain from activity, looks on and watches how determinateness, with its concrete life, just where it fancies it is pursuing its own self-preservation and particular interest, is in fact doing the very opposite, is an activity that results in its own dissolution and makes itself a moment of the whole.
So what? Yeah, once again, like it's not like when you think about something, it's not that it becomes, not that thing. It's that you understand more of what that thing is by thinking about it as a thing, as a separate concept, as a distinct, discrete content or discrete item. I guess you can call it content. But by doing so, you kind of fit it in, right? You fit it into your experiences, to your understanding of the world, to your understanding of that thing. And therefore, like you said, it becomes part of the whole once again. Um, I don't know. Oh man, I just feel like I'm missing the explanation here, like how I'm really kind of thinking, well, like what about this is so exciting to me. But I don't know. I hope it gets you all too.
Here in section 54, Hegel is going to center the discussion around something that has been lurking in the background the entire time, but which he hasn't explicitly formulated, and that has to do with the identity of thought and being. And so this is a good point to pause and talk a little bit about this term idealism. Oftentimes, when we're using it in ordinary English today, we don't mean by it what is meant by it in philosophy. What we tend to mean is that a person has ideas, and then they think that those ideas can be realized in the world, or that the world ought to conform to their ideas. Usually they're happy, shiny ideas. We talk about somebody being idealistic. Most often in contexts where we think that their views on things are actually out of line with what a more realistic, that's the opposite that we bring up, a more realistic attitude or perspective, one that takes into account the dark corners, the hidden motives, all the things that make life such a mess. So there is a connection there between that sort of notion of idealism and what Hegel is proposing for us in the Phenomenology. And in some respects, you could actually see what he talks about as begrifflos, translated here as superficial, literally lacking the concept, attitudes towards the identity of thought and being. You could say, if you wanted to, that in order to be a German idealist, all you really had to do was to assert the identity of thought and being. There are idealists who are non-German who are influenced by, particularly Hegel, like Royce in America, or the British Hegelians like Green and Bradley. But what Hegel is actually targeting here is mistaken and therefore superficial understandings of the interrelation between thought and being. Now, to be an idealist means to say not that everything is all in your head, but rather that everything that we can encounter, everything that we can experience, everything that we can apply our minds to and conceptualize is already in some way thought. That doesn't mean that it's our thought, because we're not, the center of the universe. But it does mean that it is intelligible. It's a world that in certain ways becomes humanized, you might say, or at least rationalized, made accessible to us. And this is going to carry him through the entire way. So he reminds us at the beginning, this is stuff that we've already gone over. In general, substance is itself or implicitly subject. Because of that, all content is its own reflection into itself. So there's this dynamic that we've just talked about in the last section. So now he says, the subsistence or substance of anything that exists. So anything that we can encounter, anything that actually exists, that has reality. The substance of it is self-identity. A thing is what it is. And it's kind of interesting. We often want to invoke the law of identity, A equals A. You can't do an awful lot with that, as it turns out in philosophy, but people love to talk about it. Hegel is going to use this to sort of open things up a bit, because, yes, you're right. For something to be, for it to continue to be,
goodness.
it has to remain that same thing. Otherwise, it's not itself being, right? If I suddenly turn into a butterfly, all you would really see at this point is, Dr. Sadler's there, and then poof, there's a butterfly, and you can say, well, I think the butterfly is him, probably has his consciousness, or maybe it starts talking the way they do in cartoons or movies or something like that. In that case, we're saying that there is a self-identity, and that the transition between one shape and the other doesn't really matter. What matters then is, say, consciousness. Something has to count as self-identity. Now, Hegel says this is also pure abstraction. And this is going to be the dialectical linchpin around which things are going to turn in this. He says self-identity is pure abstraction, but that is thinking. Abstraction requires a thinker to be carrying it out. It's going to sound as if there's thinking also going on in the thing, and we'll get to that in a moment. So then he says, when I say quality, I'm saying simple determinateness. It is by quality one existence is distinguished from another, or is an existence. To be something is to be something determinate, and to be not that, to be not that, not that. So already in positivity, there's a certain kind of negativity. For me to be what I am is for me not to be you, or not to be that camera, or not to be this chalkboard. Some of those are more relevant to my being at this given point in time. There's also a mode of negativity that's going to come up more intimately related to the existing thing. And it's going to come out of the very fact of abstraction itself. So he says, comprehended in this is the fact that being is thought. This is the source we talked about of all the insight that usually eludes a superficial talk about identity of thought and being. Now, since the subsistence of an existent thing is self-identity or pure abstraction, it is the abstraction from itself. This is an important juncture, so I want to go back over that again. For a thing to be what it is means that it has something that we can actually point to as the abstraction of that thing. That's its identity. And yet at the same time, for any given concrete thing, the abstraction is also in a certain way not the thing. It's a negation of the thing. It's stripping away things that we might say, well, that's just accidental, that's not really the essence. But those matter to Hegel. So that leads us over here back to self-othering, a thing becoming other than what it is, as we engage in the process of looking at it, as we pay attention to it, as we are engaged with it. So he says, it is the abstraction of itself from itself, or it is itself its lack of self-identity. So to possess self-identity leads us into, at the same time, lacking self-identity. These two go together. This is one of those places where somebody says, I can't get it, I can't understand how that can be. A thing cannot be and not be at the same time. They want to invoke the law of non-contradiction. You could think about it this way. Hegel's not saying this at this point, but you could think about it this way. The law of non-contradiction itself is subject to itself and is other than itself. That's one of the things that's sort of going on in the background here in Hegelian logic. So he says, and I'm inserting this or into here as well, he talks about these as sort of as if they're the same, and I think that's actually a mistake on Hegel's part. The thing can either fall into dissolution, which is what a lack of self-identity is, or it can offer to us and to itself a kind of inwardness. He talks about turning inward. And this is the process of becoming. So it's really not just the identity of thought and being that he's talking about, but the identity of thought, being and becoming, being intimately related to each other, as we're seeing here. All of this is being thought by some subject.
All right.
In a trivial sense, that's true, because look, we're talking about right here. You're a subject, I'm a subject, Hegel's a subject. The book is leading us through this. But he means something deeper. So he says, this is the nature of what is. And insofar as what is has this nature for our knowing, this knowing is not an activity that deals with the content as something alien, is not a reflection into itself away from the content. Science is not that idealism, so he's targeting other kinds of idealism, which replace the dogmatism of assertion with the dogmatism of assurance or a dogmatism of self-certainty. Science is not going to be a dogmatism at all. It's going to take this in. And the mere fact that something is thought for us, that it is a content for our consciousness, doesn't mean that we're entirely in charge.
Right.
That's one of the differences between Hegel and some of the other idealistic thinkers that he's sort of trying to get beyond. We have to give ourselves over, like you said in previous sections, to the object, learn from it what it has to teach us. It's not alien to us, but we're not its masters. So he says, on the contrary, our knowing sees the content return into its own inwardness. We have to follow into the inwardness of the thing. Its activity is totally absorbed in the content. For it is the immanent self of the content, yet it has at the same time returned to itself, for its pure self-identity in otherness. That's what this is depicting, pure self-identity in otherness, and it's up to us to actually penetrate into that, to follow along into that, to knock on the door, so to speak, and try to sneak in through an open window, you might say. So he says, thus it's the cunning which, seeming to abstain from activity, looks on and watches how determinateness with its concrete life. All of this has been trying to get us back to concrete existence. He's going to talk about a lot of metaphysics in this, but the metaphysics has to inform our actual experience of things. This is what could be going on when we're experiencing, he says. So he says, just where it fancies it is pursuing its own self-preservation and particular interest, in fact, it's doing the very opposite. It's an activity that results in its own dissolution and makes itself part of a whole, part of the whole. Dissolution is not always just disappearing altogether. When we're losing ourselves in this kind of study, we are actually embracing the systematic whole, Hegel would say.
Beautiful. Ain't that what I said?
Above, we indicated the significance of the understanding in reference to the self-consciousness of substance. We can now see clearly, from what has been said, its significance in reference to the determination of substance as being. Existence is quality, self-identical determinateness, or determinate simplicity, determinate thought. This is the understanding of existence, that is, the nature of existence from the standpoint of the understanding. Hence, it is Nous, as Anaxagoras first recognized the essence of things to be. Those who came after him grasped...
Hold up. What is this? Nous. The Anaxagoras. Anaxagoras. Other things partake in a portion of everything, while Nous is infinite and self-ruled, and is mixed with nothing, but is alone itself by itself, or for not by itself. Okay. Pre-Socratic Greek philosopher. Interesting. So the idea of being within itself, or a thing for itself, or something like that. He was talking about becoming itself. Interesting.
Hence, it is Nous, as Anaxagoras first recognized the essence of things to be. Those who came after him grasped the nature of existence more definitely as eidos, or idea, determinate universality, species, or kind. It might seem as if the term species or kind is too commonplace, too inadequate for ideas such as the beautiful, the holy, and the eternal that are currently now in fashion. But as a matter of fact, idea expresses neither more nor less than species or kind. But nowadays, an expression which exactly designates a notion is often spurned in favor of one which, if only because it is of foreign extraction, shrouds the notion in a fog and hence sounds more edifying. Precisely because existence is defined as species, it is a simple thought. Nous, simplicity, is substance. On account of its simplicity or self-identity, it appears fixed and enduring. But this self-identity is no less negativity. Therefore, its fixed existence passes over into its dissolution. The determinateness seems at first to be due entirely to the fact that it is related to an other, and its movement seems imposed upon it by an alien power. But
let me finish.
Within itself, and being self-moving, is just what is involved in the simplicity of thinking itself. For this simple thinking is the self-moving and self-differentiating thought. It is its own inwardness. It is the pure notion. Thus, common understanding, too, is a becoming, and as this becoming, it is reasonableness.
Yeah, so it seems like he's talking about the idea of let's see here. We were saying here, this notion. So the idea of like where people use a concept or a determinate, or like a name, species, kind, idea, a concept that that is purposefully, vague, because it feels more, ooh, yeah, it's out there, like divine, divinity. What is that really? It can be any number of things. Um, but something like species, precisely what what you mean. Or use, I mean, there's still some nuance there, of course, but like species, you're thinking about, okay, this is a taxonomical, category, concept of, a animal or even a plant or some other life form, or even it could be a species of an idea, meaning every relation, every relative to this specific, idea, things like that. Um, versus something like Nous, I guess, or not Nous, but he said Nous simplicity uh, is substance, precisely because existence as defined is precisely because existence is defined a species. It is a simple thought. Interesting. Nous simplicity is substance. On account of its simplicity or self-identity, it appears fixed and enduring, right? But this self-identity is no less negativity, meaning negation, like the otherness and all this other stuff. Therefore, its fixed essence passes over into dissolution. The determinist seems at first to be due entirely to the fact that it is related to another, and its movement seems imposed on it by the alien, like that, by the otherness, by the fact that it's an abstract idea. It's therefore um, that's what makes it kind of valuable or interesting, is that it's different than us, but really it's that it comes back into it. It comes back into itself by its understanding and trying to explain it and learn it and things like that. Having its otherness within itself and being, yeah, self-moving. Yeah, I think I'm getting this. I think. Let's see here.
It's becoming, it is reasonableness. So how does the human understanding, which is one of our faculties, grasp being as it's been articulated throughout the rest of the preface in this Hegelian way? Is the understanding actually up to the task? Here Hegel's actually talking about some of his predecessors' ideas, and he's suggesting to us, look, what I'm talking about is not something that was explicitly said by these previous great thinkers, but it's what was going on in the background that enabled them to make the advance that they did at the time. So what can he actually tell us about this? He starts out with saying, we've just talked about the relationship between existence and quality, and we're going to talk a bit more in further sections about the importance of quality. By the way, if you look at Hegel's logic, you'll see that quality is one of the sort of key ideas in our understanding of a thing. Not quantity. We've talked about why mathematical cognition doesn't provide us with a model, but quality. It's a metaphysical
qualitative stuff is always powerful.
Understand. And this is essentially Aristotelian.
Qualitative insights.
Aristotle devoted a lot of work in his metaphysics and also in the other works that kind of accompany it, like categories, to thinking in terms of, well, what actually is a quality? Can we distinguish different types? How do they work? In any case, he says this is determinateness. A thing, an existence, is determinate self-identity, simplicity, and now how is it grasped? Well, the understanding grasps it. The subject, the mind, is getting a hold of it. So he says, we can now see clearly that existence is quality, self-identical determinateness, or determinate simplicity, determinate thought. This is the understanding. The thing that's out there. Well, let's take things that are out there before we start thinking about what about my emotional states or parts of myself or my own thoughts, because then it gets a little bit more tricky. But the thing that's out there is also for us. It's in our consciousness. We are aware of it. We are connected with it. If not, we couldn't even say that it exists. We could imagine it out there, of course, but imagination is not the same thing as reality as well. So he says this is understanding of existence. Hence, it is, he uses this Greek term here, nous, as Anaxagoras suggested. Now, Anaxagoras, he's less than clear. I'm not going to say he's a little unclear. It goes beyond that. He's less than clear, in part because we don't have that much of what he actually wrote, so we have to speculate, and our speculations are based in significant part on what later thinkers made of his doctrine, and they may have been faithful to it and may not have. That's not particularly important here. What is important is that Hegel is picking up on this notion that mind permeates the entirety of not just the universe, but existence. So mind is literally everywhere, in everything, and going on. Now the question is that our mind? No, we're not at that point yet. This is an advance, Hegel thinks, to realize this. So he says, it's Nous, as Anaxagoras first recognized the essence of things to be. Those who came after him grasped the nature of existence more definitely, and now we have two other ideas, as Eidos or idea. And where are these notions coming from? These are coming from Plato. So, we have a thing as being something that is a marker or expression or imitation, what have you, of an idea or of the form is how we often translate Eidos. And there's a whole bunch of discussion of what does Plato mean by form and all that. Here's enough for this point. Hegel is saying there's some advance being made. First we have Anaxagoras, then we're having Plato. Plato is of course going to locate the forms somewhere else. They're apprehensible by us through our mind. They're in the thing in a certain way, but it's very murky how they're in it, more by sort of reflection or participation. Then comes along Aristotle. And now we get terms or concepts like universal, kind, species. Aristotle does continue to use the word eidos, but now he means this sort of thing, which is found, gotta give the master his due, right? Which is found in the thing. This piece of chalk is a determinate thing. It's being used up as we're doing this. It's, if we want to get all Hegelian about that, it is approaching dissolution. It is becoming non-identical with itself because it's all up here, and this is something different than this. This conveys intelligibility, is widespread. We could say, well, it's still the same substance. No, it's not. Actually, it's become something quite different. But Aristotle would say this. You can look at it in a number of different ways. You can look at it as chalk, as having a certain essence. You can look at it in terms of its shape. It is a thing like this. It can also be looked at in terms of its functionality as a writing instrument, right, in conjunction with a blackboard, or I suppose a sidewalk somewhere. That is closer to treating the thing as the thing, as it is for the understanding, than Plato was, or Anaxagoras was. So there's a progress that's been made here. And Hegel says, a lot of people want to go back to something more like Plato's idea. They say that the term species or kind is too commonplace, it's too inadequate, it's too pedestrian, we might say. And it's too low for ideas such as the beautiful, the holy, the eternal. We want those to be ideas rather than species or kind. But if we want to develop understanding of those things, it's an advance actually to think of them in a more mundane way. Hegel's not going to be saying Aristotle had it all right, we're going to stick with the categories and the logic that he has. He's proposing something very different. But what he is saying that Aristotle did get right was saying that, hey, if we want to see the beautiful or the eternal, it's got to be where we can actually encounter it. That doesn't
make
mean
it determinate.
Something that we can see, smell, touch, feel like as if the eternal is a hamburger we can consume, and then digest. But what he is saying is that this way of looking at it is actually going to lead us in the right track. So he says, idea expresses neither more nor less than species or kind. And then he says, precisely because existence is defined as a species, it is simple thought. Nous, simplicity, is substance. And so on account of its simplicity or self-identity, it appears fixed and enduring. But this is an illusion. These things that we're encountering, particularly when we thought of them in terms of universals, they are not actually so enduring, self-same throughout all of time, that they don't engage in a process of developing. Like he says, the self-identity is no less negativity, therefore its fixed existence passes over into its dissolution. The determinateness seems at first to be due entirely to the fact that it's related to an other. And there's two very important kinds of negation that are always going on within the Hegelian dialectic. There's the negative relation to something that's not it, something that's other, and then there's the negative relation to something that is not it but actually is it, that came out of it. And we see that things self-other and then are reappropriated into themselves. And these two can interface. That's part of why things can actually interact with each other within the Hegelian universe, you might say.
Right.
Also why we can come to have conceptions of them, why we can think about them, why our thinking itself can be productive. It's due to the power of, like he said, the power of the negative that we're able to do this. So he says, having its otherness within itself and being self-moving is just what is involved in the simplicity of thinking itself. For this simple thinking is the self-moving and self-differentiating thought. It is its own inwardness. It is the pure, now he brings up his term, translated as notion or concept. The German for it is Begriff. That sort of thing.
Begriff.
It's concept, it's Begriff. All these other things are sort of steps on the way towards grasping that. But this is where we really want to get to. And he says the common understanding too is a becoming, and as it's becoming, it is reasonableness. So what's translated there in that last sentence, Verstand, he says it's verständlich, meaning that it's understandable, it is comprehensible, it's intelligible, we could say. And this intelligibility, once we start thinking in terms of the notion, this intelligibility doesn't quite get us to Vernunft, which is reason, but it does get us. Oops. on the way to, there we go, Vernünftigkeit, reasonability, rationality,
Vernünftigkeit.
the property of being something that goes beyond just the faculty of the understanding to something that thinks in terms and works things out in terms of the concept, the notion.
Dang, okay. Breaking it down for us. So that was a little fast because I had it on like 1x or 2x, but yeah, it's I really like this breakdown. Once again, the idea that you can understand something, or the action of understanding something, the active action of thinking of something, right, abstracts it, and that abstraction, becomes an other of itself. And by messing around with it more, that othering of itself, kind of redefines itself, or comes back into itself, gives you more better understanding of what that thing is, what that concept is. So it's interesting too to see that progression of people thinking about it from what you said,
This intelligibility.
Nous to the or thinking about existence, going to the Nous, the Eidos or idea, to the universal species. Um, I was thinking about it in different terms of species here, but yeah, this universal or kindness or whatever, and then going into this notion, um, or form, or rather concept, or something like that. Um, Definitely interesting kind of progression of how we think about things, how we think about the universe and reality and existence of what makes something, a thing. And I wonder what would be the today's progression of this idea. um I don't know. uh I gotta look up some modern day philosophers and see what folks are thinking about this stuff, this progression. Once again, sorry for the background noise, a lot of folks up right now, but um yeah, super interesting stuff as always. Really great to learn from this. So let me know what you got from this. I really want to do this more often, but I don't know if I can. I already have so much to do after this. And I've already been running late, so I don't know. But thanks as always for watching, and let me know your thoughts. Have a great day. See ya. Bye.